Now, I've built several apps and they have to be secure, but how can I make sure? Stay tuned to find out more.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
I know you're chomping at the bit for more GSEC, and well, lucky for you, we got it coming at you. We're going to be talking about vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, and well, you know what, Daniel, I'm just going to start here. I've built several applications. I say, yeah, I follow security best practices. They're absolutely locked down, nothing to worry about. However, I've started to think, I can't actually validate that or verify that. So can you give us a rundown of like how that process would go?
Yeah, and you bring up a really good scenario, at least the idea of it. You work in a development environment. Maybe you're just somebody who's building infrastructure, or you're building a bunch of network systems. Could be any of these things. It doesn't matter what it is, but you're following the security best practices. It goes along with whatever it is that you're doing, just like Justin. But how do I know for sure? Well, we have to be familiar with some of these initial concepts first before we can get into the idea of vulnerability scanning and penetration testing properly, so that we can kind of have that conversation. One of the first things they want us to understand for the exam specifically is the idea of doing recon. We have to kind of like survey the land, as it were, and see what is it that is out there. What are the assets that are a part of my system that I need to be aware of so that I can actually test for them, right? And then of course, you have to worry about protecting those as resources when it comes to doing a vulnerability assessment or a penetration test, or both, because again, there are production things, right? If I have a production server that could be sensitive to maybe doing denial of service attacks, so I'm doing what they call stress testing. If it knocks my production server off, can I handle that kind of a hit during production hours, especially if I'm a 24/7 company, which most companies are nowadays? So I have to take that into account as I do my reconnaissance, and I figure out I have all these machines, I have all these hosts, I have all these resources or assets, and now I got to start categorizing them and what needs to be protected. And of course, that goes into also the idea of the CIA triad, right? The old confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? What on those resources are, because they might be digital resources. It may be something that's on the device itself, not just the asset. There's multiple types of assets. So these are other things that we have to be familiarized with. So if I have maybe something that has intellectual property, or we've come up with the better, stronger, faster mousetrap. We're about to launch this thing. Well, I don't want that to get out. I need to keep that confidential. So that is an asset, and I need to protect it accordingly, right? If I do a vulnerability assessment, will that expose that? Will it not? Will a penetration test expose that? Will it not? Do I have the risk appetite to be able to actually test against something that might contain or have access to that information? And do I want my pen testers to have that? I know they'll sign non-disclosure agreements and all that other good stuff, but you never know, right? It starts to really focus us in onto the three big things that we need to be aware of when it comes to these initial concepts. We've looked at recon, we looked at our protecting our assets, our what they say, resource protection, right? And that's into vulnerabilities, threats, and risks. Well, you might say to yourself, they sound synonymous. I saw it wash over Justin's face just off camera. He's like, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, I'm like, Daniel, I hate to break it to you, but
I just pulled out a thesaurus. The
vulnerabilities, threats, risk, danger, Will Robinson, they're all the same.
It does really seem to be like it's all the same thing. But there's some minor nuance there when it comes to cybersecurity that we need to be familiar with. So let's start with vulnerabilities. A vulnerability is the possibility that a threat might be able to take action against your system, okay? So what I mean is, let's say, Justin, you're building a site for me. You got a web app cranking up for me, and I take a look at it and I go, how do I log into this? You say, we can just log in with admin. I go, cool. Well, that is a vulnerability. It is possible that someone else could guess or brute force their way past that because it's a very insecure thing. Now, of course, we're still in the testing phase, but what if he accidentally patched it into the internet? that could be a trouble, right? So that is a vulnerability. It is the possibility that something may go awry. Now, that brings us to threats. What is a threat? A threat is something that could take advantage of said vulnerability. So if I were someone, let's say I was a hacker, I'm a threat actor, I've targeted Justin's organization, he's accidentally exposed this admin login to the internet. I'm scanning for his environment to see what's going on, trying to get a network map going on. I go, what's this new web app they've got going? I didn't see this before. Oh, it's got a login. Well, let me try some easy stuff. Admin. Oh, I'm in. That's a threat, right? I'm the threat. I'm the one leveraging the vulnerabilities. So hopefully that differentiates between the two there. And then we have risks. So what is a risk? A risk is not only the vulnerability, not only the threat, but the potential fallout if all those things did occur. What are the scenarios I'm facing if something like that did happen? And then, of course, we take a look at all that and we assess that stuff and we do a risk assessment. It's a lot of fun for everybody. But I think with those things in mind, we are now poised to have a better conversation about vulnerability assessments and penetration tests.
It's one of those things where those terminologies, I tend to, if it's just you and I talking, I use those words interchangeably. But do know, vulnerability is the capacity to be exploited. A threat is the actual exploitation, right? And then risk is, well, if someone were to exploit it, what kind of impact would it have on me financially or in some other capacity, right? Now, speaking of which, finding some of these vulnerabilities, right? Some of these like string concatenation, so that would be injection attacks, I can see those. I'm aware of those. But there's other times where I'm like, well, I didn't know that was there. How do I go about finding those?
Yeah, great question. And that really does help move us and segue us right into vulnerability scanning. Because Justin is right. He is but one man. And even if he had a team of people, if they were manually going about it, and not that they wouldn't do that, not that that's, excuse me, not a good practice, but that's a heavy lift. And a lot of times what we can do is employ things like vulnerability scanners, a tool that automates that process. And what that will allow us to do is fire and forget, right? I can hit a scanner, not that it's an exhaustive thing, and this is just a piece of the security puzzle, but a very important one, right? So what I've done is I've got a security scanner, a vulnerability scanner, spun up. We can log in, take a look at a scan that I've done just to see the kind of stuff that maybe you would miss if you were doing it manually, all right? So let me get logged in here. Let me do a little bit of that here. Admin and then the password. There we go. Once I get logged in, I get a lovely dashboard. So if I've run multiple scans, I can take a look at those, all the previous stuff I've done. So I can go to something like scans, look at results, make reports, great stuff, right? So here we see that from a previous scan that I've run, it's showing me results by CVSSs, result vulnerability word cloud. Love word clouds. They're very, very helpful. By class, low, medium, high, and log. Notice most of them were just log, but I did have quite a few highs. This is something that if I were to have fired off a scan in real life for Justin's application, we would want to definitely look into that. And we can come down here and start seeing what those high vulnerabilities are. I'm saying operating system end of life detection, so we're going to lose support for patches and upgrades. Here we have a denial of service vulnerability to the Linux system that this machine is running. Let's see here. We got XSS, which is cross-site scripting, and command execution vulnerabilities. That's really bad. That's one we're probably going to want to go further into. And you can click on these, get more information about it. Here was the detection, installed version, product information, giving me the CVEs that are references for this specific vulnerability. So I'm getting that further information. And all I had to do was start my scan. Make sure that it was completely up to date as far as the day I scanned. Get all that I can. Don't want to use old stuff, right? Fire it off. And now we can just look at the generated report and walk through that and start doing some mitigations. So vulnerability scans, super helpful with that. It helps us also with our risk assessments, because now that we know what the vulnerabilities are, we can start to build that equation. Okay, here are the vulnerabilities. There are these threats out in the wild that could potentially leverage these. and the fallout from that would be X. And now we know where our company stands as far as risk goes, right? Start doing proper risk management and either accept the risk or what do they call it? Where you give the risk to somebody else. Maybe I move this to a cloud service and let them handle the operating system. And now I don't have to worry about updates anymore, right? Now I only have to worry about Justin's web app. And it starts to reduce my threat landscape, right? The attack surface, as we like to say. So there's vulnerability scanning, pretty simple process. You fire your scanner of choice off. There's others called Nessus, is a very, very popular one. I highly recommend it. It's a good one, especially if you have a full enterprise environment. It's probably going to be one of your better bets. If you're running a smaller shop, OpenVAS is what I'm using here. It'll work for you just fine. It can be a very helpful scanning utility, so don't count it out just because it's open source. But do your due diligence, find a good scanner for your environment, and deploy it, employ it, have a good time with that.
And this is one of those things, as a developer, I always think of how can I get better, right? How can our company get better? This would become part of my automated systems, right? I make a push. I've done a code review. Me and Daniel get together, and he goes, "Hey, that's bad." Okay, I found one. But then also in the background, my scans are happening.
Yeah.
And then if my scans find something that's wrong, then it just stops. Sends me an email, sends him a whatever, right? The klaxon goes off in the office, and we got to go fix something. By having those multi-layers, you're less likely to go, "Oh yeah, I got a buffer overflow in production. By the way, we're going out of business." That's on me. But that's just vulnerability assessment. You have some automated tools. You should do some of that manually. However, there are times where you go, I found them. I think I found everything. It looks good, but we're human. We make mistakes. That's where penetration testing comes into play, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is going to be basically, excuse me, it's going to be your next phase into security assessments into your system, right? Remember, the idea here is to verify that what we're doing to secure the system is actually effective and is working, right? So once we have a vulnerability assessment, that's kind of like really stage one of a proper penetration test. We have to understand where the vulnerabilities are. So don't get the two confused. Don't because that does happen from time to time, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some confusing terminology or things that get used interchangeably in our security world here. A vulnerability assessment is not a penetration test, and a penetration test is not a vulnerability assessment. They're two different things. They might have similar ideas, but with a vulnerability, I'm just finding those vulnerabilities so that we can do a risk assessment. Or maybe we have to do it for compliance, right? With a penetration test, I'm going to take those vulnerabilities and I'm actually going to see if we can exploit them. Not only is it theoretically possible, but is it actually possible? Is it practically possible, right? So some things we need to know about penetration tests are the different types of penetration tests that we might encounter. And one of them is going to be white boxing versus black boxing, right? There's gray boxing as well and other colors under the sun, or gradients of black, I guess. But those are the main ones, right? White box and black box. With a white box test, I have complete intimate knowledge of the system. I have probably a login, username and password, and I'm going to work as someone who has access into that world. Whereas a black box test, I'm going to act more like a real threat actor would, as coming from the outside and trying to work their way in. So understanding the difference between the two, and not only that, but why would we do one over the other, right? So why would I want to do a white box test that doesn't seem realistic? Except it is. And you say, well, how is that? Well, because insider threats are a real problem. People get bribed, they get disgruntled, and you have to prepare for threats that come from the inside just as much as you do from threats from the outside. And of course, that black box test will give you a more realistic look into what it would be like to be attacked from the outside. So maybe you want to do one, the other, both, whatever your risk appetite is, as well as the current state of your environment, which would be more beneficial. All right, let's talk about internal versus external, which is kind of what we just mentioned there, but using those proper terms where I have an internal threat. How do I mitigate against that? Maybe I need to do separation of duties, start to make things a little bit more difficult for one person to have a bunch of power inside of the company. But we'll only know if we do that type of audit, or that kind of penetration test. So internal versus external. Maybe I come in and act like I'm part of the dev team, start looking at actual code, right? Doing code review, looking for places that things could hide or be exfilled, or sensitive information that could be maybe sold on the black market and that kind of thing. Of course, an external test, as always, is somebody coming from the outside and trying to work their way in. All right. Now, we've been using the word pen testing, but you also may have heard the term red teaming. Justin, I'm going to throw this on you. Let's see. Have you heard the term red team?
Yes.
What is it? How do you take that to mean?
People who are behaving as malicious actors toward your company, toward your assets.
Now, would you say that seems synonymous with penetration testing?
Kinda.
Yeah.
Kinda. So
Let me ask you this. Have you heard it be used synonymously?
yes, I have.
That's really what we're trying to get at here. Because Justin's been in the game. He knows a thing or two, which is why he's here with us, lending his expertise on this topic. Red teaming and pen testing, kind of like vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, are not the same thing. They tend to get used synonymously, right? So let's go ahead and just kind of level that playing field for you. Make sure you understand those minute differences. A penetration test is where you are going to exploit some things and you're going to report those findings. But there are going to be times when things are off limits. You're going to have to scope that penetration test. Do you want us to do stress testing against this production server? No. Almost always the answer to that question is no. Sometimes people are brave and they go for the gusto, right?
They got misplaced confidence.
They do. Because your production server goes down, you are losing money. So most people do not have that level of risk appetite. But if you're on a red team, if you're doing proper red teaming, there is no scope. Everything's in scope. You get to act as a true advanced persistent threat. Your goal is by any means necessary, gain access to the system, keep access to the system, exfiltrate data, and do whatever, act as a threat. If we're not catching you, that's a problem. And ultimately, the goal of any of a vulnerability assessment, a penetration test, or a red team, the goal is to, the blue team would be the opposite side. These are the defenders, people that are trying to defend these systems a day in and day out, is that they win. Ultimately, they should win every time if we're treating this as a game, right? So, a red team is actually going to act just as a true threat actor would that has targeted their organization, okay? So make sure you understand the difference in that. A couple other terms. Social engineering is a good one where, hey, I use people's, they call it the art of human hacking or hacking humans. I play on your cultural normalities, on your personal idiosyncrasies. Are you a very much a people person or a people pleaser? Maybe I can get past things. I don't even have to do anything. Or I send you a phishing email. Perfect example of social engineering, right? So using those social norms to your advantage, leveraging them so that you can gain that access. But a social engineering campaign, very commonly done. A lot of banks like to do this stuff. What can you get away with? Can you rob this bank by just a nice suit and a smile and a good story? Maybe you can. I've seen it happen, right? Let's see here. Web app pen testing. Justin knows about this. He's actually you had to go through this before, haven't you?
Yeah, it's a fun time.
Yeah. How'd that work out?
So let me tell you this. Fairly aware, try to stay, keep it in the front of my mind. Hey, here are the common web app vulnerabilities. Here are the ones that apply to the web app. Injection attacks are always a concern, right? Input validation and sanitization. I was like, I got it. I got this on lock. I didn't.
You missed something.
I did. I missed something. It was actually a boundary issue. I allowed non-bounded input on a field.
Seen it 1,000
and
times, right?
Right? People
Tales
go,
all
well,
the
that
time.
doesn't seem like a big deal, but you could have shut down my database. Right. You could have caused like memory issues on my server. At the very minimum, it could have been a denial of service. Yeah. But you may have even got things like, hey, I somehow figured out how to do a buffer overflow. And
now I'm executing code.
Yeah, so it was an easy fix. I actually did really well, but you're not perfect.
Right.
So just keep that in mind.
That's a great point. No one's perfect in this game, which is why we perform these activities. A couple others we need to be familiar with. Well, a web app obviously you've built a web application. We're going to test it for things like cross-site scripting or code injection or command injection and SQL injection attacks, that kind of stuff, right? CSRFs, all the go look at OWASP's top 10. That's what we're looking for, right? With a web application. Physical tests as well. Do I need to check the guards, gates, and guns, the things that secure the facility? Is there a lock on a door to a sensitive area? Is it easily bypassed? Is the room been reinforced so that if it is actually a secure area, that it is actually secure, right? So there are physical pen testers go out there, and those guys. As of the recording of this episode, there were a couple of people, I think in Iowa, that were arrested for performing a physical pen test, and they had their get out of jail free card. And guess what? They went to jail. Their trial is now over as of today, or as of a couple days ago, and they were acquitted.
Yeah.
The judge found them not guilty.
That was one. That was like a horrible set of like
This was
unfortunate
worst case
circumstances.
scenario, yeah.
Where their get out of jail free card didn't actually cover, but there was like out of sync issue, and
Yeah.
somebody didn't know, and things can go horribly awry. So if you're going to go that way,
Get that paperwork.
yeah, make sure, double check, triple check, absolutely 100%, because jail is no fun.
No.
So I hear.
I like to avoid it at all costs. Hopefully you do as well. We're going to help you out with that. Just a couple more network penetration tests and wireless penetration tests. Just checking those devices, making they are secured properly. Patches are installed. There's no open ports. There's no running services. Wireless isn't not secured. All right. Wireless is secured is what it should be, right? The double negative was fun to say. But there you go. That's a penetration test. Different ways in which it can be done. There's a lot of generalists out there that can kind of do them all. But there's also a lot of specialists that specialize in one or the other. So it's up to you to figure out what you need for your environment. But make sure that you are engaging in that so that you can make sure and know for certain whether or not your security controls are effective.
I tell you what, Daniel, I'm getting a little paranoid. I got a couple of apps out there. I'm going to have to go call some
Got that
people.
tinfoil.
So we're definitely going to have to call this one done. But definitely join us back for more GSEC. But for now, signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Justin Dennis.
I'm Daniel Lowry.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.